Right after Donald Trump was reelected, I recorded and posted a video in which I explained my very real concern that Donald Trump would never leave office until his death. And I wanted to make that video to explain exactly why I said that, because I know when you say that, people think it sounds ridiculous. Oh, that could never happen. So I wanted to explain in detail the different ways in which, yeah, it could happen. Now, I took that video down. It's not currently up. And the reason is because it's not exactly the way I wanted to make that video. I watched it and I thought, you know what? I want to change this a little bit. But Donald Trump has just made a comment in which he expressed a desire to run for a third term. And you know what? I don't have time to recut this video. I want to get this information out. It's important. Here's what Donald Trump said today in a meeting with House Republicans. He said, "I suspect I won't be running again unless you say he's so good, we've got to figure something else out." Now, Donald Trump said this sort of jokingly. I'm sure his defenders will say, oh, calm down. He's not serious. He's just joking. He just said this to upset the libs. You know, it's all about owning the libs. But Donald Trump isn't joking. Donald Trump doesn't joke. He doesn't have a sense of humor. This is the way Donald Trump introduces things that he intends to do. He doesn't just come out and say something horrible normally. He'll ease into it. He'll pretend to joke about it at first. And people will defend him by saying, oh, he's just kidding. That's just Trump being Trump. But he's deadly serious when he says these things. And I think he's serious about this. I think he's testing the waters. I think he's laying the groundwork. And so I wanted to repost this video so that you can see this really is something that could potentially happen. And I explain how it could potentially happen, because too many people just write this off. It's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous concern. Don't worry about it. It's unconstitutional. He'll be forced out. Well, who's going to force him out? Please watch this video and let me know what you think. The next 4 years are going to be an unmitigated disaster for the United States. And not just for our country, but for the world. And that's not hyperbole. Many people around the world are just as shocked and appalled and afraid about what the future holds as many of us are. There are so many things that could happen over the next 4 years that would be truly catastrophic. And I think we're going to see a lot of those kinds of things happen. The damage that's going to be done to this country, I don't think many people can even get their heads around the possibility of what might be headed our way. I think it's going to be worse than most people think. But beyond what happens in the next 4 years, I'm concerned about what happens after that 4 years. Is Donald Trump really going to leave office? Is Donald Trump really going to participate in a peaceful transfer of power to a newly elected president? Why would you believe that he would do that? I certainly don't. I don't think Donald Trump is going to leave office in 4 years. I do not think that Donald Trump will leave office until he dies. And I know some people will think that that's ridiculous. The president, by the Constitution, is limited to 2 terms. He's already served one, so the Constitution prohibits him from serving another term after this one. And so it's ridiculous for me to think that he would remain in office. I think it's ridiculous for anyone who would say that to think that it's not a possibility, at least, that he would stay in office illegally and unconstitutionally at the expiration of his term. And there are many ways he could go about doing that. Let's just think about some of the ways he might go about doing that, shall we? I guess number one, he could say, I'm running again. I'm running for re-election in 2028. Now, of course, people say you can't do that. Constitution says you can't run again. So what happens when Donald Trump says, screw that? I'm not going to abide by that part of the Constitution. I think that part of the Constitution is unconstitutional. I think it's illegal. I think it's anti-democratic. Why should a president be limited to 2 terms? Members of Congress and the Senate aren't limited to 2 terms. Members of, the judiciary get to serve for life. Why is it fair that a president is limited to 2 terms? That's not democratic. I'm a protector of democracy, and we're going to ignore that part of the Constitution. What if he says that? He says he's going to be a candidate. Well, what would the Republican Party do? Would they include him in the primary process? Would they allow him to be a candidate in primaries for the Republican nomination for president? Do you really think if Donald Trump said he was running again that the Republican Party would say, no, you can't? We're not going to let you run in the primary? Of course not. And there wouldn't even be a primary if we're going to be honest. They'll just say Donald Trump is our nominee. He won't have to run in a primary. He'll just be the nominee. There will be no primary. So what happens then? Will the states put the Republican nominee, if it's Donald Trump, on state ballots? Well, I'm sure there will be lawsuits to try to keep him off the ballot. And who's going to decide that? The Supreme Court eventually? It has to be filed first in the district court, work its way up. But that question would ultimately get to the Supreme Court. And with this corrupt Supreme Court, do you have any confidence that they would not rule in Donald Trump's favor? You think the Constitution means a damn thing to this Supreme Court? No. The Constitution, as it's currently written, prohibits insurrectionists from ever serving in public office again. Donald Trump should not even have been a candidate. The Constitution bars him now from being a candidate or from serving. That didn't stop the Supreme Court from just saying, well, that part of the Constitution doesn't really have any meaning. That's essentially what they said. Yeah, it says that, but it's stupid, so we're going to ignore it. That's what the Supreme Court decision in that 14th Amendment case said. Oh, they dressed it up in fancy legal language, but that's what they said. Yes, the Constitution says that, but it's stupid and we're ignoring it. That's exactly what they would say if Donald Trump said he was running again. Don't you think? Oh, yes, the Constitution, we passed an amendment that says a president is limited to 2 terms. But that's stupid, and we're just going to ignore it. Or they could find some sort of technicality to rule that amendment was not legally passed. There's any number of things they could do to rule in Donald Trump's favor, right? So, for example, the amendment had to have been passed by 3/4 of the states. They could just look at the whole process that occurred and just find some irregularity that occurred in the voting of one of those states and say, they didn't comply with such and such and such when they ratified the amendment, so we're going to throw it out. It was unconstitutional to begin with. It wasn't ratified correctly or whatever. They could come up with anything. And I don't even think that they would even waste time trying to find some technicality to make up to try to rule in Trump's favor. They would just say what they said in the 14th Amendment case. Yeah, Constitution says that, but that's stupid. So we're not going to give it any legal weight. So the Supreme Court wouldn't prevent him from being on the ballot. Well, what would the states do ultimately? Would the states include Donald Trump on the ballot for president? Well, every single state controlled by Republicans would. And what about those states not controlled by Republicans? Are they going to disobey the Supreme Court that says Donald Trump can be the nominee, can run for president again, that constitutional prohibition doesn't mean what it says and we're not giving it any effect? Are they going to say, well, too bad, Supreme Court, we are going to give it effect and we're not going to put him on the ballot? You think any of those states would do that? Hell no. Did they defy the Supreme Court when they ruled in Trump's favor on the 14th Amendment case? No, they went right along. The 14th Amendment says what it says. The Supreme Court ignored it, and then the states went along. And that's what they would do if the Supreme Court said Trump can run for a third term. They would just say, oh, well, the Supreme Court said he can, so our hands are tied. Well, what if there was a state or two who stood up to the Supreme Court and said, no, the Constitution says he can't do it, we're not putting him on the ballot? Well, then, those people who would say that in the various states, they might just get a visit from somebody sent by Donald Trump. Now remember, Donald Trump has full criminal immunity. So when Trump sends his goons to make a threat, Governor, it would be a shame for anything to happen to your beautiful family, or something like that. They'll fall right in line. So if Donald Trump wants to run for a third term, he's going to be on the ballot in 2028. And don't worry, Donald Trump won't take any chances that the American people might vote against him in 2028. In fact, I doubt that the American people would actually vote for president in a majority of the states, because what would happen is, remember, we've talked about this here, the Constitution gives the states the power to choose how they will select their delegates or their electors for president. They don't have to choose their electors for president by vote of the people. It's up to the legislatures of the several states to determine how presidential electors are selected in their state. And they can just say, we are going to give Donald Trump our electors. The legislatures can say that, and then there's not even a vote in that state, and that would be absolutely constitutional. So think of every state that has a Republican legislature, and Donald Trump tells them, I want you to change your laws about how presidential electors are selected. No longer are you going to leave it to the people to vote for president. You're just going to declare me the winner of all your state's electors. And they can do that. And that's what they'll do. Or they can always just do something to prevent the electors being sent to Washington so that no one gets a majority, in which case the House of Representatives, elects the president. There's any number of ways that Donald Trump can be on the ballot in 2028 and then use Republicans in the states and in the Congress to just hand him the election. Absolutely, they can do that. But what if he's like, you know what, I'm not even going to go through that trouble. I'm just telling you now, I'm not leaving. We're canceling the presidential election. There will be no election for president in 2028. I'm staying. You guys stole the election in 2020. I would have had 8 years uninterrupted as president, and you robbed me of that. So I'm not leaving. I'm entitled to 8 years uninterrupted, so I'm staying for another term. Election is canceled. Well, of course, the president has no authority to cancel a presidential election. It's not even run by the federal government. It's run by the states. What would the states do? Would the states say, screw you, we're going forward with an election for president in our state? Well, I'm sure some will try to do that. But you think any Republican states would do that? If the leader of their cult told them that there's going to be no presidential election, what do you think Republicans in the various states will do? Yes, sir. Election canceled. They're not going to face Trump's mob. They don't want something unfortunate to happen to their family, so they'll go right along. And they probably wouldn't need much persuasion anyway. Imagine how firm the grip that Trump will have over every Republican in this country 4 years from now. They'll just go along willingly. So, in a lot of states, the election will be canceled. There won't be enough states that go through with the election, if any of them did, because any state that says, screw you, we're going forward with the election, would get threats, And since Donald Trump can commit crimes with impunity, he can carry out those threats. So there's a very real possibility that if Donald Trump says the election's canceled, we're not doing it, that the states would fall in line and there would be no election for president of the United States in 2028. Or if some states went forward with it and Republican states didn't, then there wouldn't be a majority of electoral votes sent to Washington anyway, because many states didn't have an election. And so the Congress could either just ignore it completely and said, hey, you heard the man, the election's canceled, he's not going, so we don't need to convene on January 6th to do a certification because the election was canceled. Or they could say, you know what, since there wasn't a majority of electors sent to Congress, then the House of Representatives, controlled by we Republicans, we're just going to pick the president, and it's Trump. So, third term for Trump. So that could happen. He could just cancel it. What if none of that works for him, and for some reason the states stand up to Trump, Republicans grow a backbone? I mean, this is highly unlikely. But what if they went ahead with a vote for president? The Republican Party had a primary without Donald Trump, nominated somebody, or whatever. Say there was an election, however it took place. And a new president was elected, and they even sent the delegates to Congress, and Congress even certified a new president as president on January 6, 2029. What if Donald Trump said, yeah, that's nice, but I'm not leaving. You can certify, you can have an election if you want, you can certify if you want, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm president right now, and I'm not leaving. So I don't recognize the results of that election. I don't recognize Congress's certification of an election that elected somebody else as president. I'm the president, and I will continue to be the president. I'm not leaving. What are you going to do about it? So what would happen then? Well, I'm sure somebody would run with some paperwork to the Supreme Court. What do you think the Supreme Court would do? Even if they were willing to rule against Donald Trump. So what? Donald Trump just says, yeah, that's a nice little ruling you made. I don't care. I'm still not going anywhere. What are you going to do about it? And what would happen then? Is someone going to come and physically remove Donald Trump from the White House? And if so, who would that be? I can't think of anyone. Can you think of anyone? Donald Trump has the military. Donald Trump will control the entire federal government, all the law enforcement agencies. And by then, Donald Trump, as you know, Donald Trump is, they're talking about loyalty pledges for every member of the executive branch. 4 years from now, there's going to be nobody in any position in the federal government, in the executive branch, who is not personally loyal to Donald Trump. So there's nobody at any executive branch agency who's going to remove him from office. You think the Attorney General is going to order the FBI to come drag him out of there, or the Secret Service, or Homeland Security? No. Who's going to drag him out of office? Is there going to be some group from the states? Maybe the National Guards are sent by governors to remove Donald Trump from office? Or maybe state police are sent? Now, state police don't have any jurisdiction except within the confines of their state, so I don't see how that would work. But you think that that would work anyway? Donald Trump controls the United States military. And again, he will do to the military exactly what he's going to do to the executive branch. He will get rid of everyone who is not personally loyal to Donald Trump. There will be no generals or any other high-ranking officers who will not be personally loyal to Donald Trump. The entire leadership of the United States military will be made up of people like Michael Flynn. So all Donald Trump has to do is say, the military is going to protect me at the White House, so don't even think of trying to remove me from office. I'm not going anywhere. Who's going to remove him? Nobody's going to remove him. My point is this, and there's probably many other scenarios we could talk about, but my point is this. If Donald Trump wants to stay in office at the end of his 4-year term, then Donald Trump is going to stay in office at the end of his 4-year term. There is absolutely nothing that can stop him from staying in office. So the question is, do you think Donald Trump will abide by the Constitution that he's going to swear an oath to uphold? Do you think Donald Trump will abide by the Constitution, accept the limits on his presidency, and leave at the end of 4 years? And if you believe that, why in the hell would you believe that? What about Donald Trump, of all the things we know about him, would lead you to the conclusion that Donald Trump will simply go peacefully at the end of 4 years? I think that is absurd to believe that. I think it is much, much more likely, and in fact, probable, that he's not going anywhere. Not only did we elect a fascist, but we did elect a dictator. And this is how dictators come to power in democracies. They get elected. And then they change the rules or ignore the rules or corrupt the military and other institutions. And they use them for their own personal ambition. And they turn them against the people. They break the laws. And they stay in power illegally. That's how it happens. That's why you have to elect good people who will abide by the Constitution and the law. But we didn't do that. We elected a fascist who told us he's going to get rid of the Constitution, who told us that laws mean nothing to him. He's a criminal. We elected a convicted criminal. And he's not a criminal from way back and he's reformed. The man hasn't even yet been sentenced. He's a new criminal, a newly convicted criminal. The point is, he's not going anywhere unless he wants to. I don't even think that's debatable. Think about the things that I just said, the various ways this could happen. If Donald Trump wants to stay in office at the end of 4 years and be a dictator for the rest of his life, there is nothing we can do to stop him. That's it. So you think he's going to go in 4 years? I think you're nuts. He's not going anywhere. Dark, dark, dark times ahead. There are consequences, and we're about to experience those consequences. The majority of the American people, they effed around. They didn't take their vote seriously, and we're all about to find out. God help us. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.